the Roger Wally Group. And finally, to his right is Hema Butikas, and I hope I didn't mangle that too badly, Hema, who is the Global Network Director for the Forest Stewardship Council, which is itself usually known by its acronym FSC. So I welcome you all and thank you for taking the time to join us today. And if I may, Frances, let me ask for you to begin. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think my role on this panel today is to be the voice of science. As Adam has said, I lead the Center for International Forestry Research, and I believe it's still true that we are the only global-scale international organization with a headquarters in Indonesia. And so it's a great privilege for me personally and for my many colleagues to be here in what Hero has just described as the pilot country of the world for RED, and to be able to have a research agenda to try to be a part of those solutions. So we're in the business of generating facts and analysis about forests. And so let me start by sharing just a couple of those that I think are quite relevant to this discussion. We do global comparative research on forests, forest policy, and people who depend on forests. And we are about to launch a major global study that demonstrates with a very large and robust data set that on average, people who live in and around forests get almost a quarter of their income, 24%, from forests. So whenever we think about changing the forest management regime, we need to think about that significant current contribution to the incomes of some of the world's poorest people. And so safeguarding that current livelihood as well as finding a way to increase it needs to be part of the analysis. Another study that we released recently is about the role of land tenure as a potential constraint on RED. For example, in Brazil, which is one of the countries which has gone the furthest in devolving land rights to individual forest land rights to individuals and Brazil, which is one of the countries that's gone the furthest in recognizing land rights of individuals and communities, we estimate that of the remaining parts of the forested Brazilian Amazon that are economically viable for RED, only about half of that is viable from a governance perspective because of what's been characterized as land tenure chaos. And I think many forested countries of the world have to face this land tenure chaos problem as a Not sure if this is editorial control over what I'm saying. Here in Indonesia, we've published a number of studies over the last year trying to help inform the discussions. For example, last year we published a study on the experience of management of funds in the Reforestation Fund and the lessons learned for how to control corruption or other kinds of fraud and abuse in new RED revenues that may come, and the need for transparency in the management of those revenues. We also did a study about what role forests could play in achieving the President's ambitious emissions reductions targets, and came to be clear that the focus really needs to be keeping existing forests as forests, because while planting trees is a great agenda, you can't get there from here by just planting trees, because it would take 2.5 times the land area of Indonesia to meet emissions reduction targets by planting trees alone. And finally, we're trying to fill in some of the empirical data that's missing on just how serious are emissions from peatlands and from mangroves, and hosted an international conference here in Indonesia 2 weeks ago, because Indonesia is very well endowed with both of those kinds of ecosystems, and so those wetland forests need to be part of any solution. So we know a lot, but actually there's quite a bit that we don't know yet, because RED is an experiment that hasn't unfolded yet. And so as Heru said, as the pilot country of the world, we're all learning about this at the same time. We have Indonesia as one country in a global comparative study of the first generation of RED initiatives, and we're using a 3E framework. What's effective, what's efficient, what's equitable? And I think while it's clear that there are technical issues and there are financial issues that remain to be resolved, it's really all about governance. And we need to face the fact that we actually don't know how to do many of the things that August Pronomo just described to us. You know, how do you create a level playing field for that spatial planning exercise to make sure all relevant stakeholders have a seat at that table? How do you ensure the kind of vertical and horizontal interagency collaboration that's going to be necessary to connect the different jurisdictions and different sectoral agencies? How are we going to make sure that we're clear about who owns the rights to forest land, forest carbon? How do you implement free, prior, and informed consent? And probably most importantly, what's the benefit sharing regime that can be put into place to make sure that local communities get an equitable part of the deal? I would argue that business is a constituency for resolving those issues, and that the 2-year breathing space that Pat Heru just mentioned would be in everyone's interest, including business, to give us some time to find the answers to some of these questions. Thank you.
Frances, thank you very much. Very bit more detail on the complexity of the challenge ahead. Dorothy, would you like to?
Thank you, Adam. So, good morning, everybody. I wish that you had published those reports in 2006, and if I'd read them, I probably would have picked a different industry. Just kidding. The complexities of RED have really been a fascinating evolution. And I thought what I'd just give at a high level is kind of some of the challenges that have happened. So I've started and exited a couple of businesses, and in 2006 I thought, right, let's find a way to use business to protect forests. So in principle, I still think that the concept is very, very real and very, very simple. Like, do forests have value, you know, other than toilet paper? Absolutely. So the principle is so simple. And then as you dig deeper and deeper, it becomes more and more complex. And so in 2006 and 2007, we first worked with Rio Tinto. Rio Tinto financed $3 million to protect a forest. The carbon credits were registered with the Australian government, greenhouse friendly, and then we were able to generate the million credits abatement, and then it was traded, and then the 5 farmers who were the landowners were able to protect that forest. So far we've done 5 annual verifications, the forest is still there, and everything is moving along. Then we came to Indonesia, and we went to Aceh. And so the total area of the Aceh project is 750,000 hectares. It's huge. There's something in the order of 68 different villages. We're working across 5 different regencies, and we've got 1 governor. And then suddenly you start running into all of the complexities, which Frances and her good group at C4 have started writing articles and long handbooks about. What was then interesting, though, is I kind of call it RED 1.0. And if you think about it, RED 1.0 is where the simple principle was, you know, you work with governments, you work with Pakpunki, people like the Indonesian government, which really is, and we've worked across the globe, probably the leading REDD country in the world. You start working to protect these forests for credits. And then what happens is you start realizing that actually the issue is not supply. Supply is moving along nicely, it's demand. You know, so in light of the earthquake in Japan, you know, what's going to happen to the demand for new credits in Japan? You know, what's going to happen in Europe with the pig economies, you know, and where does private companies and private industry go in terms of actually selling these carbon credits? You know, now that you've got these people protecting their forests, what do you do with the credits? You know, and so what was interesting then was we started looking at this concept called RED 2.0. Journalists can write that down. I just came up with the concept yesterday. But basically RED 2.0 is how do you integrate it into existing businesses? And this is why FSC, you know, why a lot of the certification bodies become very relevant. So what we found was after working, and the big interesting development with the Aceh project was we ended up getting Bank of America Merrill Lynch committing, you know, $9 million to issue the credits. I then had to go out and raise $2.5 million from private ultra-high net wealth individuals on a social impact investments sort of deal where if they get the carbon credits, great. If they don't, you know, it's a tax deduction. And then what happened was we started realizing that you needed to find a way to really bring business into the RED equation. So how do you really get REDD integrated into the products and services we use every day? And this is what we call RED 2.0. And I think like there are a few examples from having REDD in timber concessions as well as having REDD in, say, plantations. But what's really interesting is the pulp and paper industry. And when I started this, this journey for me, I used to wear khaki pants and, you know, cargo pants, and, you know, I never used to wear a suit. And I think a reflection of how things have now had to change is, as you can see, I'm in a suit. We work with, say, for example, paper and pulp. And the interesting issue there is, okay, they started out wanting to understand if they've got a portfolio of 2 million hectares, you know, how much, if they start with a pilot project,